Hello. So it's great to see Caolan Robertson live from Ukraine in the week Russia has experienced its worst troop loss since the war began. I think that's right. 10,000 troops lost in the last week, and Ukraine now has to fight North Koreans as well. What's the mood in Ukraine now? What's the mood like?
Quite pessimistic, nervous for the election, but yeah, Russia has experienced every single day at least 1,000 soldiers lost, which is the most since the full-scale invasion on a daily basis. And this is because Putin has decided that he wants to start pushing heavily on every front in this country. We've got the Kharkiv front, Chaziv Yar, we have the the entirety of the south. Everything is basically being pushed like nothing before. And that is because we've got two elections going on at the moment, one in Georgia and one in the United States in a couple of weeks. And Putin wants to try and desperately prove to the world that there is a chance that he could still win this war. And he thinks that he can take a couple of major cities, or at least try to, in the next 2 weeks to prove that, maybe Kramatorsk, maybe somewhere else, to send a message. And that doesn't seem to be working. The advancements that they're making are worrying, but they're not that rapid. They're still fields a day, not anything much bigger than that. And Russia doesn't really have the capacity, firepower, manpower, and artillery to continue this level of loss at all. The North Korean troops have just arrived on the ground in Ukraine, which is absolutely shocking. Locals are still shocked about it because they're basically the citizens of Ukraine and the people of Ukraine now have to basically fight two nuclear superpowers
Yeah.
at the same time.
Where are the North Koreans being placed? Do you know?
So we according to intelligence, 40 were placed in the Kursk region yesterday, 18 deserted, which is pretty telling because if that is the case, 100%, and this intelligence source is pretty accurate and it can be verified online, it shows that even the North Koreans who live in what is North Korea, as we know, find the conditions that the Russians live in actually too unbearable, which it looks like it is. If you see the conditions of the Russian trenches, the desertment, there was a video that was posted in the last 48 hours from a battalion in the east of this country, basically defying their commander and saying they're sending us all to our deaths and begging for help. Like, this is desperate, desperate, desperate stuff. And the North Koreans probably went straight into this thinking, this is madness. Also, the type of troops that North Korea have been training over the last since they've been at war, have been defensive positions mainly. I mean, it's
Yes.
the North Korean border, right? There hasn't been active movement and artillery and things like that. So it's been defensive. So I thought it was very likely that the Russians would put them in defensive positions, maybe Crimea, maybe Kursk, because that's what they're best at. You also can't just throw soldiers that don't speak the same language as you, that don't operate with the same type of training and tactics all over the front. It would be an absolute communications nightmare. So they'll probably be put into their own little units. But even that, is they don't want anything to do with this. And the Ukrainian television channels today actually released a direct message translated into North Korean saying that we have lovely prisoner of war camps, and if you want a dessert, we'll look after you. There's pictures of flowers in them, which is pretty wild actually. But I hope a lot of them see that. But it looks like the defection is so high that it's been a complete waste of time for the Russians to put them on the ground. It was terrifying at first, but it looks like it's pretty futile. And he basically is doing all of this because the next 2 weeks are absolutely critical. Because if Trump
Before,
wins,
yes.
that's going to determine what is going to happen in Ukraine in a lot of ways. I mean, Ukraine is
I've
the
just lost
permissions
you.
they've been allowed to use because Biden's been so cautious because of election time. So they. Mm-hmm.
So I
Okay,
lost
I
you
can
for
hear
a
you.
second. I lost you for a second. So you were telling me
Uh,
what happens if Trump wins?
Well, if Trump wins, it's going to be a complete funding collapse, which is going to be a nightmare for the type of weapons that can come into Ukraine. People are very worried about it here. I've been talking to people about it endlessly for the last few days. But Ukrainians have already started gearing up to basically realize that they might have to win this war themselves. That's why they've been building drone technology at breakneck speeds. That's why they've been building, they've recently just developed ballistic missile
Yeah.
technology, which is incredible for a country of this age. And they're starting to think that they're going to have to fight this alone or just with Europe, because if Trump wins, they're going to be on their own because America could be led by Putin's best friend. And this is it's a really 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 concerning time. So that's why we're seeing such strange and dramatic movements, and expect much 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 more of it between now and the 5th of November. Make or break critical period since the beginning of the full scale invasion. So it's going to be really dramatic, actually. Um, and I would just suggest following what's going on here as closely as possible, and looking at what happens in the Georgia elections. Look at what happened in the Moldova elections recently,
Hmm.
which in which there were evidence of massive Russian interference and disinformation, because the Russians are desperate at the moment. They're doing everything they can to try and gain influence and power, because they are being humiliated on the battlefield in a lot of senses. Kursk took more land than the 18 months of advances that the Russians had in the east. And Putin's friends are getting angry at him. The oligarchs of Moscow are sick of this war in a lot of ways. And although he held this silly fake summit a couple of days ago with his lunatic friends from across the world, and the leader of the UN, which is embarrassing, he's
Yes.
still pretty isolated. He's still pretty isolated. If you travel to Russia, you can't use your credit card, and wealthy people in Russia know this as well. They have massive difficulties going abroad. So I think he knows that this is make or break for Putin as well. Like, I cannot describe how critical this period is right now.
Yes. I mean, there's a story on the BBC today which is quite interesting about um, Russians Russians being forced to enlist in the army rather than face court cases. They either go to once you're arrested in Russia anyway. If you can't bribe the police, it's a one way ticket to jail. But now they're being told that if they're in that position, they don't even have to face the court case. They can they can be enlisted, be sent to Ukraine. So it undermines law in Russia. There is no
Yeah,
law
not
in
that not
Russia.
not that there was any decent law in Russia, but we saw this in the last 6 months, and we saw this towards the end of the Wagner Group being around, when they started to pull people out of mental asylums in Russia,
Mm.
when they started pulling people out of prisons in Russia and putting them onto the front line, and then we saw barbarism between Russian soldiers within months of that, because they put lunatics and criminals and stuffed them all together and given them weapons. So this is why we're also seeing like a 5-to-1 ratio on the battlefields here. We're seeing the Ukrainians absolutely outnumber them in terms of the actual. I can't remember there's a phrase for it. 5-to-1 anyway, because their lack of they've got lack of training on the Russian side, and they're insane people, a
Yeah.
percentage of them, and they are criminals. And they, when the trenches get stormed and when they get captured, we see massive evidence of alcohol and drug abuse
But
through the ceiling. All the commanders are
but
wasted. It's just a joke.
am I not right that the Ukraine has actually has what's it called? Yeah, commandeered. No, it's not commandeered. Conscripted more people than than Russia has done. Ukraine is fielding more soldiers than Russia.
Well,
Just,
there's
I
a huge
think.
advertising campaign at the moment. I mean, I'm looking at 3 billboards right now that are very sleek, showing soldiers on motorbikes and recruitment ads. And actually, a huge majority, if not the majority, of soldiers fighting in this country are people who are volunteering to
Yep.
fight and people who are wanting to fight to defend Ukraine. It's
And
the videos. Yeah,
you've met some of these people, haven't you?
I've just come back from Zaporizhia yesterday, where I interviewed guys that fight in the trenches. The Russians are a 27-minute drive from the city center there, and they are as driven as ever to save their city. Zaporizhia is a beautiful city, and for victory. I just did an interview with one of the commanders down in Zaporizhia. This is going to come out on my channel on the weekend, where he designed this beautiful memorial site, and he basically just doesn't sleep. All he does is work and work and work and work because everyone is basically there's a feeling here of loving Ukraine, loving your country, and having something to fight for. Um, and these videos that come out that I see, which are propaganda showing people being pulled off the street, and these kind of scary, these scary videos of people being thrown into vans, are either staged, or they're arguments with conscription officers and they're taken to police stations. And these are very rare, and they're happening in strange towns in the east of this country. It's not something that I have seen anything of. And I have been to Odessa, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, and Kiev all in the last 2 months. So this is people volunteering to fight, because they want to fight. And when I speak to soldiers on the front line, they were software engineers, they were graphic designers, they were car salesmen, they were people with completely regular jobs before the war broke out that decided to throw everything down before any kind of conscription laws were here and go and fight for their country. And that is generally the Ukrainian spirit, which is why Ukrainians have managed to hold off the Russian army for years. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And it's because one side knows what they're fighting for and wants to win. The other side are drunk and don't even know why they're there and have to pull out North Korean soldiers, which I hope one day we can look back at that and laugh. I mean, right now it is scary. I was actually at a comedy club last night, which is called Laughter Underground, because I like to be on the pulse here and see what people are thinking. And, one of the young students walked on stage and said, "All right, guys, so North Korea's joined the party. There we go, here we go again." And, there's a slight humor to it, but because it's so absurd. But it looks like because of the defecting that we've seen in the last 24 hours and because they're probably going to be put in defensive positions, it's not the extreme, immediate on-the-ground threat that it looked like in the initial report. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there, but they're probably going to be pretty piss poor on the battlefield, really.
Well, you mentioned students. So are universities still working?
Yeah, everything's still working. Look, it's great. It's a functioning, beautiful city. It's everything's great.
It's wonderful.
Because Ukrainians make a point of victory not just being killing soldiers, but victory is actually about continuing to live your life and continuing to function despite the war and continuing to make an effort, even if things are more difficult. Again, when I saw a building blown up in Odessa, in Kherson a couple of weeks ago, within an hour there were street cleaners in jackets cleaning up the glass because I asked them why. They said they wanted to keep their city clean and beautiful because that's part of victory. When I was in Zaporizhia a couple of days ago, the Russians put a Cab 500 massive bomb into the center of the city, and I went and saw the crater, this giant crater, looked like a meteorite site, and went to go and get my camera to go back and professionally film it, not my phone camera, and within 2 hours it was gone. I was like, where? I could swear there was a crater here in the middle of the city, and they'd filled it in because it's about life going back to normal as soon as possible. And it's also the opposite of the Russian mindset. The Russian mindset is decay, it's stealing, it's criminality, it's dirt, it's theft, it's corruption. Whereas here, it's about doing things properly, and that's also part of culturally being different to the Russians and being Ukrainian. And you can see and feel that all the time. These are the cleanest streets in Europe. Everywhere.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
not just the square. This is the whole city. I can't really. It's hard to describe this unless you're living in this country. But it's it's very inspiring, and that's why they still put on comedy shows. When I was in Zaporizhia, I was there because I was invited to the world's first underground music festival in a bunker, which was being shelled while we were there, and they were playing Irish music, and it was about victory, and it was raising money for the soldiers, and the Russians were a 27-minute drive away, and so was the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. But they still did that because it's about making a statement and victory being Ukrainian and celebrating life. And that's the main arch that I've seen since I've moved to this country in the last 2 months. Not just, when I've been here before, it was trenches, it was warfare, it was fighting, it was chemical war, it was all of this. But now I'm like really feeling exactly what this is. It's amazing.
It's phenomenal, and you're doing great work. And people, how do people find your channel?
So if you type Caolan Robertson, Caolam Robertson, into YouTube, then now it comes up as a top result. So it's not hidden within the underground caves of the algorithms of YouTube. It's right there now, which is nice.
I'm so pleased. Right. Okay. Well, people need to go and follow your channel. They need to follow what you're doing and support what you're doing. You're doing very good and stirring, brave work. So you are safe. You are safe at the moment, aren't you?
Yeah, well, Kyiv has an air defense system that is very effective, the Patriot system. It's far safer from the sky than when I was living in Odessa. But yeah, I mean, I will be traveling often to frontline cities. It's a place to mentally recover, reset, and it feels like home. So it's good.
Very good. Very good. Caolan, thank you very much. We will catch up
Thank
shortly.
you. Nice for the church bells to end the interviews.
Isn't
It's
it
nice symbolism
wonderful?
too.
Excellent.
There we go.
Bye
All
bye.
right.